Welcome to today's discussion on Still Images Meets Motion Pictures, hosted by Isiphethu. My name is Monica Bolter, and I am a Foreign Affairs Office with the U.S. Department of State. Our U.S. Consulate in Durban is thrilled to be partnering with this team to bring Lauren Barkume to speak with you all today. Lauren Barkume is a training director at Creative Learning's Aids to Artisans Division, which is based in Washington, D.C. With over 16 years of experience in international development and artisan programs, Lauren has also spent a substantial amount of time in South Africa working directly with entrepreneurs, artisans, and small businesses in the region, developing community co-created programs and designing and running practical business skill workshops for small business owners, and working collaboration with artisan communities across South Africa. In 2021, she launched Artisans Business Lab, an online learning platform powered by Aid to Artisans for global creative entrepreneurs. In 2022, she developed an in-depth online self-paced course called Artisans Costing and Pricing and regularly speaks to entrepreneurs in the creative industry on a variety of topics related to export and the international retail sector. She also owns a photography business servicing business owners, couples, and families in the Washington, D.C. area. Lauren cares deeply about facilitating responsive, community-driven development. We are thrilled to have Lauren with us today. And if you missed Wednesday's conversation, please go back and watch that live section. Lauren, thank you so much for being here, and I'll hand the program over to you.
Thank you so much, Monica. It's great to be here again. And hi to all of you joining us from the Isiphethu program. It's great to have connection again. I was in South Africa just a few months ago and did a workshop at the UKZN Center for Creative Arts and was thrilled to be welcomed back here again to do this virtual program. So with that, I'm going to get started and share my screen. Okay, so today what we're talking about is still images meet motion pictures. So what do we mean by that? We're talking today all about photography and cinematography and where they come together, where they meet in the middle, and the overlap and skills between photography and cinema. So you heard a little bit about me from my creative learning and aid to artisan side, but I also want to share a little bit about my photography business and my photography experience. I am a portrait, wedding, and event photographer. I've been working for about 12 years with my own business. I have clients in the DMV, but I actually started my photography business in South Africa and was delighted to really win awards with my work. I've gotten great experience, and I also have experience with some amateur filmmaking. So one of the things that I did when I was living in Johannesburg is I was part of the 48-hour film project, which was a lot of fun and a little bit crazy. And so some of you might know that. So that's my little entree into the film world. I did also work and collaborate with a few amateur filmmakers and actors and writers when I was living in Johannesburg to do some short films together. And I regularly work with videographers as well when I'm working at weddings. So that is my experience with photography, and that's why I'm talking to you today about photography, because this is something I've been passionate about. I also studied fine art when I was in college, so art has always been something I've been interested in, and some of these things we're going to be sharing with you today are all about how to hone your eye and how to be creative, to be intentional, and to really strengthen either your photography composition skills or your cinematography skills. So let me show you a little bit of my work before we get started. I am a portrait photographer. I work with a lot of couples, and I also do weddings. So as we're going through here, we're going to be looking at light. We're going to be looking at composition and creating with intention, watching for the story, watching for the emotions. And so I want to start with a quote: "Creativity is a wild mind and a disciplined eye." So this is just a reminder that, creativity is like anything that you can imagine. But to create that into a reality, you have to have that disciplined eye. And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about disciplining the eye, starting to see the light, starting to see the composition, and understanding the rules so that you can create even more impactful work if you are doing photography or you're interested in doing photography, or if you're interested in getting into film. And so really this talk is about the meeting of still images and motion pictures. So where do they come together? Where do they overlap in this world of film and of photography? So today what we're going to talk about is first cinematography meets photography. And so what is that overlap? Where are the similarities? And then we'll go into composing with intention. So composing with intention, learning what are the rules of composition, and also how can you learn to break the rules. You can't break the rules unless you know the rules. So it's really important to have, again, that disciplined eye. And so learning the discipline, learning the rules is going to help you become even more creative and more intentional with your composition. Next, we're going to talk about moving your feet. So what do I mean by move your feet? When you're photographing, when you're filming, you want to be active. You want to be thinking creatively about where you are shooting from, what's your angle. And moving your feet is the most effective way to do that. So different angles, and how do you look at a scene in multiple ways so that you can get the most impactful angle for the story that you're trying to tell. Then we're going to talk about seeing the light. So by seeing the light, this is something that you hone as a skill in photography, in cinematography, is starting to understand how light works. How does light fall? Where's the dark spot? Where is the bright spot in any sort of scene? This is something that is a skill that you have to hone. It's not something that, we as, unexperienced photographers or videographers go through the world, and most people just sort of, see the world as it is. And as you start to create with compositions, with intention, and starting to see the light, you're going to start to see differently. You're going to start to be more intentional about where you're using light, where you're focusing on, and how that light can impact the image, the story, and the composition. And then finally, we bring it all together with visual storytelling. So if you missed our last talk, go ahead and watch it again. It was all about motion pictures and the significance of photography in the film industry. And so we talked also about marketing images and also visual storytelling. We'll go through that again and bringing it all together after you've sort of created this intentional composition and you've learned your rules of composition. So first, cinematography meets photography. So what are some of the areas where you have overlap between the world of cinematography and the world of photography? Well, both photography and film have to use composition. You're using images and people in images. With cinematography, those people are moving, you're hearing things, but they both use composition, and they both use the rules of composition to create engaging stories. So we'll learn about those overlapping rules today. They both use lighting, and there's all different ways to use light to create a story, to create visual impact. Cinematography also shares camera settings with photography. You're using different types of cameras, but they are going to be similar settings, long lenses versus short lenses. Different apertures will give different creative looks. Choosing your lens selection, what kind of focal length are you going to be using? They both also overlap with visual storytelling. So even though film is moving pictures and telling a story with words as well as with music, you are telling a visual story with both. And the only difference is that one is moving and that one is still. And then both of them have post-production. A photograph is not really to its full creation, to its full potential, until you've actually edited that photograph and put your intentional artistic mark onto that image. And we'll see through this presentation, we're going to see different examples of fantastic films and stills from various different movies. And you're going to see the different types of editing that were done that create a different look and feel. This comes out in the color of the film of the image. It also comes out in the light, the type of light that is used. It comes out in the composition. So as we're going through, start paying attention. You want to start honing your eye to start to see composition. What are the rules that they're using? What's the light? How have they done the color grading or the editing process? What's the look and the feel of the image? So with that, we're going to start with compose with intention. And this is the biggest thing, is like creating that intentional composition. And some of these images that I've just showed you are from Wes Anderson movies. And Wes Anderson is a cinematographer, director that has really become very well known for a signature style. And there's a lot of elements of composition that he uses across all of his movies that have become almost immediately apparent to be his style. And so, you can think about this too, and using intentional compositions, intentional rules of composition to really start to create a signature style, either as a cinematographer or as a photographer. So starting first with the rules. What are some of the rules of composition? Well, one of the big ones is rule of thirds. Rule of thirds we'll get into in a little bit, but this is one of those really big compositional rules that once you know about it, once you've heard what it is, you are going to start to see it everywhere. Okay, so as we're going through these again, start to look and start to see each photograph, each film, and how are they using these? How are they using these rules? We'll talk about the golden ratio, another one that's very common and pleasing in nature. We'll talk about symmetry and balance. So using intentional balance in different ways, asymmetrical versus symmetrical balance. We'll go through leading lines. So what do I mean by leading lines? And framing. So framing can have different meanings in the film industry versus like in a composition, but we're talking about compositional framing. And so using a framing element in a composition. So, photography is really one of those things that you can really see these rules because it's a single image. When you are working in film and when things are moving, you want to think about using these rules, and then how does the characters move through this composition and maybe morph into a different composition. And so still paying attention to these main rules. So starting first with the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is essentially we are creating in a rectangle. So a camera or a video camera or a photography camera is going to create an image that is in a rectangle. And because we're working in a rectangle, we are dividing that rectangle, that is the image, into thirds. So you can see here we've divided it into 1, 2, 3 across the top, and 1, 2, 3 across the vertical axis, across the top to bottom. So when we divide these two axes of the image into 3, what we get is we get points where those thirds connect. So those lines are connecting where the red circles are. Now the red circles are points where there's a lot of impact. So there's a real, when a human looks at an image, these are sort of power points. And so they are great places for you to place a subject or whatever it is that you want to be of interest or of significance in a shot. So using these 4 points of the rule of thirds tells you how to frame, one of the best ways to frame, and where to put those points of interest. So someone's face, if you are using movement, like having a longer shot, where to place those people in the shot. So rule of thirds, we're going to see how that plays out in an actual movie. So this is from Harry Potter, and this is a classic use of the rule of thirds. So you can see on that PowerPoint in the top right is just where the character's face is. And so this is drawing the eye to her. She is the main sort of character. Now you see also on the other axis at the bottom left, that's where the other action is. So there's 2 points of action here, and they are both actually on those PowerPoints in the rule of thirds. So this creates a strong composition. It automatically sort of is where the eye is drawn, and it's very pleasing to the eye to see things in these thirds. So we're going to see this in this image too. You can see so the red dots are about where those 2 different points of the division of thirds are. So those are about where they've placed their 2 characters, on the rule of thirds. This is also really common in characters talking to each other in a movie. So you often have a conversation that is filmed with someone's back behind, and then you have the other person in front. And look exactly where this person is on that line of thirds. And you can see that his face is at the intersection of the top left points between the 2 different third lines. And then the person on the right is, again, on another one of those third lines. And this creates that balance and that feeling of a complete composition in that shot. Here's another example of where the person is exactly on that line of the third. Now this time he's on the bottom third, the intersection of the 2 bottoms. And you can use the full line, but really thinking about where those intersections are in an image is going to give you those impact points. Here's another example from the movie Parasite. We can see he's on the rightmost third line, and his face is on the intersection of the 2 different top third lines. Okay, so now that you know this rule, you are going to start to see it everywhere. We use it very often, and this is one of those rules that you can take even further if you wanted to. If you want to start to play with the rules, I always recommend get the rule down. Really think about like creating compositions with this rule of thirds, and then you can start to break it. So how might you break it? Well, maybe it's now the rule of 16ths. So you divide the composition into 6 instead of 3, or and then putting the character or the main point on a more extreme intersection of lines. That is one of the ways that you might be able to play with this rule. Then we have the golden ratio. So the golden ratio is, the rule of thirds is really simple compared to this obsession with the golden ratio. So this is something that has existed in artwork for, a very long time, and it's known as the Fibonacci sequence. So this visual spiral is created by the sum of the 2 previous numbers. So the first 2 numbers are 0 and 1, and then that equals 1. And then 1 plus 1 goes into 2. 2 plus 1 goes into 3. And this is repeated over until, you sort of add these squares, and it is the spiral effect that is created by adding the previous 2 numbers. Now, in life and nature, this is seen all over. We don't just see this in composition. We see this in ferns unfurling. These are found in nature. Flowers that have a center of different pollen. You'll see this type of spiral in many different elements of nature. And so it's a very familiar type of ratio and composition because we see it all over the place. So this is very pleasing to the human eye because it's so familiar to us. And so this is something that is really great to see in images and to use in images. So how does this play out into a composition? Well, this is looking at a golden ratio over a particular composition. So you have sort of the center of the tight spiral, and you can see loosely how sort of the characters are following the spiral of this golden ratio. Same here. This is a movie from The Godfather. Again, you have sort of this spiral on the side, and it sort of spreads out to the left, and that creates that golden ratio. This is from the Barbie movie, and I thought it was almost a perfect golden ratio example because look, here it is. The slide is the golden ratio, essentially. And so, you know, again, these are very pleasing to the eye. It creates a lot of visual impact, satisfaction, and, you know, you can have someone moving through this golden ratio even. The next thing I want to talk about is leading lines. So what are leading lines? Well, in art, we learn about the vanishing point and how this is an example of the vanishing point. And so you've got all these intersecting lines going to the horizon, and when you're drawing, you know, creating those lines that head towards the high horizon. It can be like actual architectural lines, like this bridge, or lines from the bushes on the side of this this particular walkway. Many things can create leading lines, but these lines sort of lead us towards, they create depth, they create movement, and lines don't have to just be that vanishing point. They can also indicate movement. So anytime a human sees line, we like to follow that line with our eyes. And so it's very, you know, we have these unconscious movements when we see an image where our eye goes to certain places first in the image, and then it moves around the photograph or it moves around the picture. Now, lines help you to move the eye in where you want the audience to move. So whenever you have lines in an image or in a movie, the audience or the person watching the movie or the person viewing the picture is going to follow those lines unconsciously. So we can use lines to our own effect. We can use these lines that we have naturally existing everywhere in the world. We're filled, you know, we're a world filled with lines. You know, we live with architecture, we live with trees. There are naturally occurring lines, both straight and curvy, everywhere. We're surrounded by them all the time. And so, you know, you can use these to your own effect to create movement of the eye towards the point that you want people to pay attention. So how do you use lines in movie and film? Okay, so we have these lines that we can see, you know, so we've got repeating lines, we've got all sort of going towards this vanishing point. Now you can see this person is walking towards that woman who's in the center. All these lines are sort of leading to that woman in the center. You've got the shadow on the left that is going to be walking in the actual film towards sort of showing up. So you've got all these movements going towards the center. It's a really impactful way to sort of drive that that visual interest to the direction of motion, to where that person is headed. And so this character with the on the right with the back to us, you know, that is the direction he's walking as well, you know, along these lines. And this is repeated by all the architecture and all the lines that are in this shot. So this is a really powerful example of the use of leading lines. Now, lines are not just, you know, vanishing point lines. This is from Breaking Bad. So this is, you know, triangles, diagonals are very powerful lines as well. And so, you know, having characters, you know, we've got the one much higher up in the front and these two in the back. This triangle that's created by the just by sort of where the heads are placed is also a very dynamic composition. It's way more dynamic than if we had stood up as the videographer and filmed it from straight on. And so if their heads were all in one line together, that would feel much more flat. This feels more dynamic, more powerful. It really brings, again, these lines are sort of leading you to the main character in the front at the top. So using, it doesn't have to be literal lines, but people connect the dots. And so you can suggest lines, you can suggest the movement of the eye through, creating points of interest that are in a, pleasing diagonals or in a triangle. Here's from 2001 Space Odyssey. This is one of those, you've got all these black lines that are coming in towards the character at the center. You've got sort of repeating circles towards the person in the center. Again, all these lines are like really, it feels like motion already. It's a still image, but you've got this sort of movement of these lines converging together on the person who you want them to focus on. This really brings the eye to the center. And, it doesn't have to just be, again, vanishing points. So here, this is a shot from the movie Parasite. Now, we've got lots of leading lines in here. We have the road itself, it's curving, and it's curving to the person that is the character in the top left. They're very small. And so how do we emphasize that person? You're really using all these lines. You've got the top line, you've got the line of the road, you've got the green, the line of the green, you've got the line in the top coming down. All these things converge on that person. So even though they're very small in this image, they are, one, they're on the brightest spot, which is where our eye naturally also goes. And two, all of the lines lead to that person. So naturally, when you see this image, you're going to look there because all the lines will take you there. You start, your eye starts at a different part of the image and it will eventually lead to that person. This is another image from Parasite. And again, you're using all these lines. So right to the center, she's right at the center, and you've got all these lines of the floorboards, of the architecture that are leading right to her. And so it's really drawing your eye in to this moment of emotion that she is showing. Here's another example from a diagonal example. So this is the Truman Show, and when he sort of discovers that his world is not actually reality, and so this very strong staircase, this very strong diagonal, it's a beautiful composition. It's got this really striking light, which is hard light, and he's walking up this wall. So we've given him space to walk, and this line indicates the direction that he's going to be going, and it really brings you in. And you notice also he's on the point of the thirds. So we're using the rule of thirds here because that's where he is, but we're also using this diagonal leading line. Now we're going to talk about balance. So there's two types of balance. There's symmetrical balance and asymmetrical balance. So when we think about balance, you can divide the picture that we have, the square, the rectangle, into twos. So we have a center point, and then we have division of two. So we're not dividing it by thirds, we're dividing it in half to really create points of strength at the center points. And so one of the film directors who really uses symmetry a lot is Wes Anderson. And so this is a Wes Anderson, a film shot, and this is using symmetry very strongly. Now you can see he's been very intentional about exactly dividing this screen into two. And so the spine of the book is exactly along the line of the center point, and same with his eyes. So this can be very powerful, and just being really intentional about, if you're going to choose to use symmetry, you have to be very precise about symmetry because the eye doesn't like if it's just slightly off. Again, you want to be intentional about these compositions. Here's another shot from Wes Anderson. Again, perfectly symmetrical. We have two red chairs on either side. We have two, lights on either side. We have him directly in the center. Perfectly symmetrical shot. And it's very powerful. It's like really got a lot of visual impact. And it's kind of immediately Wes Anderson. This is, again, sort of his signature style. Again, Wes Anderson. Perfectly symmetrical. She has the two binoculars. She is in this perfectly framed in this lighthouse. She's got exactly the same number of rails on the right as on the left. And so, again, you have to be very precise to get this right. So just starting to see if you want to use that symmetry as a rule of composition in your work, then being really intentional, really precise about it. Here's another example of Wes Anderson. Again, we're using symmetry. So the center line is the table, but they are reflected. They're almost like mirrors of each other on either side. And so they are facing the same direction. They are leaning the same way. They both have their knees crossed towards each other. It feels very much symmetrical, even though they're two different people. It's not an exact mirror image, but it's very strongly balanced symmetrically. Okay, here's an image from Parasite. You can use reflections to create that symmetry. This is a beautiful reflection from him looking out and his face reflected in the window. Now looking at asymmetrical balance. So asymmetrical balance is where you don't have two exactly opposite each other, but you have one element that is maybe in the bottom right quadrant and one is in the top left quadrant. They are not exactly the same, but by having 2 points of interest or 2 things that they might be different, you are creating that balance asymmetrically. So they're not exactly the same, they're not reflections of each other, but you have these 2 competing or different elements that are then balanced because you have, they feel balanced between each other. And so this is, again, a great shot of the woman and the alien. This is another example of asymmetrical balance. So we have the main character on the left on the bottom, and then we have these lovely feet jumping up the staircase on the top right. So again, we're balancing asymmetrically. Here's another example of a film and how you might be able to film a conversation with asymmetrical balance. So on the left, you have the person much bigger, much closer. The person at the back is much smaller, but they are placed, in a balanced way. So even though you've got someone extremely on the right, or on the left rather, you have that other person sort of balanced on the right and the top. So this creates that balance. And it doesn't have to just be 2 people. It can be, whatever the point of interest that you're creating. So when you have 2 things and you want to sort of showcase both of them, you could create balance with those 2 things using asymmetrical balance. The next thing I want to talk about is framing. So framing in composition is when you put the main subject inside some sort of frame. Now, this is literally a window frame. And this is, again, from the movie Parasite. And you have this person sort of throwing up outside the window in this sort of chaotic area of Korea. And you've got them behind the bars of this window. So we could have chosen to photograph or to film this outside of those windows and just show them in the alleyway. But by adding the frame, you can also add layers of symbolism. You can add sort of confinement. There's a feeling of like he's in prison because of these bars of the frame. So you can add layers of meaning and of composition when you choose to use this as a framing element. Here's another example of framing. They're literally not in a frame, but you can see that the door frames perfectly the person walking and the 2 dogs. So that, again, is the brightest point in this image. This is also from Parasite. And you've got her walking through the scene. and is framed by the door. So there's a moment where she's framed by this door. And so it really brings your eye to this character that is in the center. And you can see also they're using leading lines. There's many lines in this image. There's many lines in this house. And so architecturally, it's also the vanishing point is sort of at that point where she is. Here's another example of framing. So literally, again, we're in window frames, having people in these boxes. It sort of creates this element where you can, again, use symbolism. You can use that as visual impact. And it doesn't have to be, frames, literally. You can also use reflections. So this is a mirror, and we've framed this the character in the mirror. And so you could turn this around and you could shoot it the other direction, but by shooting it through the mirror, you are adding this sort of element of interest. It's an intentional choice that you can use when you are trying to tell a particular story. Here's another example of framing. And so we are, again, using the architecture of this tunnel to frame the character and the car. Okay, so next I want to remind everyone that to get these creative angles, to create these intentional composition, you have to move your feet. And so what do I mean by move your feet? That means you physically are going to have to go in places that you're not usually standing. The humans are used to everything sort of seeing the world at eye height. So we're, between, let's say, 4 foot, between 4 and 7 feet at like eye level, that's where we're used to seeing the world. We're not used to seeing the world from high, from low. And so those angles, when we see them in images and when we see them in movies, they are really impactful. And that is because it changes our worldview. We're not used to being up on the top of a building and looking at the world from so high. And so that automatically is going to give you a dynamic image because it creates this interesting view of the world that we're not used to seeing. So, it's really part of your visual storytelling. It's like, where physically do you need to be to get this shot, to get the angle that you want to tell the story? So we start with get high. This is a shot from directly overhead. So we've mounted the camera like on the roof, and we're shooting down. And so what an interesting way to sort of see the end of this fight scene. It's like all these people have collapsed. This is from Captain America, and we're in this elevator going down, and it's just a different way of seeing the world. So immediately it's got a lot of impact because, again, we're not used to seeing things in this angle. So getting high is the first one. Here's another one. Getting high, looking over the cliff. How can you really show someplace that's unusual, that creates that dynamic? You also see here we're using a lot of diagonal lines. There's a lot of movement of leading lines to sort of show the subject and direct you to the subject. I love this shot. This is from a Wes Anderson movie as well. And you can see it's like precisely directly overhead, but he's also using symmetry. So he's using balance and perfect symmetry. He's gotten this perfect circle that is perfectly centered, and these 4 different people who are sort of moving within the frame, but that is what creates that really interesting shot. Like, we never see the world this way. So it's really engaging for us to see the world differently. Okay, next shot is to get low. Okay, so how can you physically get super low? Photographing from below is often the way that you're going to be able to capture expressions if someone is doing something facing down or writing or like looking at something below them. You always want to think about, how can I see the whites of their eyes? So if you can't see the whites of the eyes, maybe that means you need to get low, or you need to square up. You need to get the full impact of that actor's expressions or of the subject's expressions. So getting low, again, is a perspective that we're not used to seeing. And so it really does create that visual interest. Here's another one, getting low. What's this? What's the way? He's like falling down. This is like a plane that's falling out of the air. And so, what's the most interesting angle to see this? Well, from below, it's sort of like, how are you going to fall? And the advantage to this is he's looking down. So how do we read the character's expression without being below them, because you can't see the whites of their eyes? So get low. The next one is get close. Get close means, again, this is going to give you really a lot of impact. Getting close to that person, getting close to whatever it is that your subject is. And you can really showcase emotion when you're getting close, getting uncomfortably close. I sometimes hear from my photography mentors, it's like, you're not close enough. It's like, you need to get even closer. And you often need to get closer than you think, closer than is comfortable, because it really creates a lot of impact the closer you get. Okay, so how do we get closer? What's even closer? This shot is just someone's eye looking through this peephole. So telling that story of like looking through this small little hole, that's best told with like this eye, really, really close. Also, we looked at this Oppenheimer image in the last webinar, and again, by being close, we're really getting the full impact of that emotion, the full feeling of this horror that he's seeing. So the next step, of course, is to get far. So you want to show the extremes. Again, we as humans, we're used to seeing the world in middle distance at eye height. And so that when you can show the extremes, really close, really far, really high, really low, all these things create more dynamic images. They create more dynamic storytelling. They give people visual interest. And so you always want to be trying to do these four things: get high, get low, get close, get far. And if you can pull all of these into your movie, you're going to have a more dynamic movie. Or if you pull them into your photography, again, you're going to tell a more interesting story. So pulling back, what is the whole scene? This is, seeing, they're the last people on the dance floor. There's the band is sort of like, the only ones left with the two of them. Pulling back, showing the whole scene, getting far. Again, like setting the scene, pulling back, really showing where it is that they are located. So the next is to see the light. Okay, so after you start moving your feet and you start getting close, far, high, low, you want to start seeing the light. So the light, what do I mean, see the light? So the eye automatically goes to the extremes. So when we're looking at an image, when we're looking at a film, our eye is automatically going to go to either the brightest point on the image, so the lightest part of a photograph or of a film, or the darkest part of a film. So how can we use that to create interest, to put our the focus of the attention of the viewer onto the point that we want them to be paying attention to? We want to be intentional with our compositions. So by lighting the Joker on a dark background, your eye he pops out immediately. You go straight to his eyes. Whereas if this background had been light, or if it had been the same color, the same tone, it would not have that visual impact. So by seeing the light, you're gonna look at, for light on dark. How do we put light on dark? How do we put dark on light? And then how do we look at soft light versus hard light? So first, dark on light. So getting as dark as we can and putting light behind the darkest point in the room. So you can see this is a very powerful shot of this silhouette of the main character. And he's framed by the brightest point in the room. So he's in a closet. And also he's got all these leading lines coming in towards him. He's got, your eye immediately goes to this character in the center, and that's, with the intentional lighting. Now, let's say we had shot this and we turned the light on in the closet, and he wasn't, he wasn't in silhouette. It's a very different feel to this image, and it's not going to have as much impact. So by using silhouettes, by you really bringing the exposure down and making that that dark character and putting them on a bright background, you are creating really visual impact. And it also creates like this different feeling, this different mood. So this is a sort of a sinister movie, and so he's a character that is dark, and so having this image also relates to the symbolism. This is again silhouettes. We're looking at the whole vista, and we've got these two characters who are in total darkness and then looking out at the light. But your eye immediately goes to the darkest point. You're not looking actually at the bright. You're looking at the darkest point because the rest of the image is light. There's another one from the Joker. So this is sort of that silhouette. Again, where's the brightest point? The brightest point is right where you want your eye to go. He's the darkest thing right on the brightest part of the image. And these, we've got these leading lines as well. So you've got, the movement of the curtains. You've got these lines that he's going through, and it really creates a lot of punch, a lot of visual impact. So light on dark. So we've seen dark on light. Now let's look at light on dark. So by by creating that brightest point, now where does your eye go? It's going straight to his eyes. Those are the brightest part of the image. And that immediately draws my attention there first. So where you light, you want to be very intentional about where is the brightest point, and use that to create this powerful image. The rest of him is in total darkness, and then you've got this just this little bright window on his eyes. Very powerful. Again, we've got him in brightness and the rest of him in darkness. Okay, that creates that visual impact. He's, our eye goes straight to him first. Here again, so we have, this is a beautiful image from The Greatest Showman, and you've got him on total darkness. He's looking up at the light. He's, got all these little confetti sprinkling down, and they're also sort of lightness. But the brightest part of the image is him. It's his face. And he's facing the light. So using that to create, again, a powerful composition. So all this comes together in your visual storytelling. So again, we talked about this on Wednesday, but first thing you have to do is, now you've got all these compositional rules. You've got these tools in your toolkit of light, of movement, of angles. And now you have to look at the big picture. What is the story you're trying to tell? So identifying what is that story and using these tools to be creative, to create with intention, to frame with intention, and use composition in an interesting way that is going to tell the story. Knowing the audience. And so, are you trying to tell a murder mystery or some scary story? You're going to use different elements and different lighting than if you're telling a romantic comedy. So these are different feels, different audiences. You also want to look for emotions. How can you showcase these emotions in a shot? Again, you want to see the whites of their eyes. How can you use your angles to get the emotion of the characters? Showing context and details. This is going to help support the storyline. Using those compositional rules to also tell that story through symbolism. So, we saw like that image with the character walking out of the Truman Show with the big diagonal walking through the sky. That's symbolic of his leaving this world of coming into reality. So using symbolism in your composition and in your storytelling. So bring this all together to compose with intention to create that story that you want to tell. So with that, I want to remind everyone, if you are out there shooting, things will happen for you. If you are not out there, you will only hear about it. So these things come with practice. You are going to have struggle. You're not going to get it at first, and that's okay. That is something that comes with practice. So I always recommend, even if it's just your phone camera, you start to look at the light, start to look and see at compositional elements and framing things in ways with intention. And practice every day. Take one shot every day. Take multiple shots every day. And it doesn't matter if they're not great because you're honing your eye. You're creating with intention. You're starting to learn the rules. You're starting to see the light and you're starting to move your feet. So this is a shot from one of my portrait sessions, my senior portrait sessions. And this sliver of light, I saw this extreme difference between the shadow and the light. And it's just like, I love it. I love that sort of brightness. I've got him on the bright spot on the darkness. So again, you got to get out there, you got to move your feet, and you got to practice to be able to create really great work with intention. So with that, I want to end and see if we have any questions. Okay, let's see. Questions, let me look. Okay, we've got, this is very interesting. I never thought that was possible. Still pictures into moving images. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of similarities between still images and moving pictures. Oh, and I should mention, this is my contact details. This is my website. My website is www.laurenbarkume.com. And if you want to email me or reach out, feel free. My email is lauren@laurenbarkume.com. So,
Hey, Lauren, thank you so much. That was great. I know I learned a lot. I am a amateur photographer, so even trying to figure out how to use this with a 4-year-old will be helpful for me.
Oh, good.
I did have a couple things that I wanted to throw out for the group to think on. So I know that this particular group and partner that we work with has a collection of videographers as well as photographers. So from a videographer standpoint, we talked on Wednesday a bit about how to integrate photographers into your process. But in terms of selection and a videographer selecting a photographer, or photographers are trying to get their portfolio in order to showcase to videographers or market themselves for this type of work, what type of best practices do you have on that?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think first thinking about like being intentional about the eye. I mean, I think that's when I'm looking at working or hiring second photographers. What I'm looking for is how creative are they being, and so I really look for if they're getting different angles. Are they using light intentionally? Can I see that they see the light? Because a lot of photographers don't, and so you can really tell once you start to hone your eye. You can really see whose portfolio shows this intentional composition, this looking at the light. So I look at portfolios that way, seeing that they've like really learned and thought about their compositions. When you're building a portfolio as a photographer, I think the key here is like don't get stuck around like only feeling like you have to shoot what you want to be shooting. Like don't feel like you only need to like wait for the job to get the portfolio. You can be creative with like models. You can get models who are willing to shoot for free if they get images for their portfolio. And so you can work with other creatives, even actors, who want to get headshots. You can sort of do exchanges that helps you build some of that portfolio to get some experience. But also just don't discount your everyday life. Like everyday life is the place you're going to get the most practice. And so, I did a portfolio workshop over a year, and one of the homeworks was to take a photograph every single day, at least. And it did not matter if it was of my coffee or my cat. And it was in the middle of COVID. So it was mostly my cats. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Active shots.
yes. And so like, even thinking like, oh, I don't really have portfolio work around me to create, but like that process really helped me to start to see and start to create more interesting work when I was with clients.
And so when you are practicing and you're building this out, what's for you, what's been your experience with mentors and getting feedback on your work so that you can get better?
Yes, that is great question. I think the best way to get feedback on your work is actually Facebook groups. There
Okay.
are tons of really great photography, great Facebook groups that are like closed groups. They're global, and there are some that are specifically for people looking for feedback, and professional photographers who are in there, will give feedback sometimes. So you can post your work and ask for critique. Sometimes you can submit your work for critique. Um, the Market Photo Workshop in Johannesburg did, at least when I was there, I had my work critiqued. I did an in-person critique with some of the Market Photo Workshop folks, and I learned so much just in a 10-minute conversation. I I thought I was so great, and then you sort of get this feedback from people like, oh, I have so much more to learn. Sometimes that's the most valuable thing that you can do is just get experts' opinion, and that will help you sort of like break through and actually start to grow.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
And I know when I was reading off your bio, I had mentioned some of the online courses that you do offer. Um, what are you currently training on in this industry? What might be of interest, and then how do folks get a hold of you after today's session if they're interested in hearing more or signing up for any of your online trainings?
Yeah, I mean, for photography, I don't have any online trainings right now. I have training specifically for artisans and the artisan sector. So, people who are interested in the artisan world are welcome to join artisanbusinesslab.com. That is a free resource. We get lots of webinars that we do regularly. For my photography side, I mostly work with clients. And so this is the training side is something that I don't have going right now, but there's so many great photography trainings and resources out there. I've worked with a lot of different mentors over the years, and I've learned so much from each of them. So I definitely encourage people to reach out. There's tons on YouTube as well, like just tutorials and how to do this. And so if you have a creative idea, you can always sort of look something up and get great ideas. But yeah, if people want to reach me, my website with my portfolio work is www.laurenbarkume.com, and my email is
Awesome.
lauren@laurenbarkume.com.
And Lauren, we had one question come in. I don't know if you can see it on the side there, um, but somebody who actually attended your very first
Mhm.
session. Can you explain the quote
Yeah.
you used on the first session?
Okay, so it's not the camera that matters, but the eye. What I mean by this is the technical abilities of whatever you're using. If you're using a phone camera, if you're using a DSLR, the fanciest DSLR, or like some used one, it really, that is not what matters in creating a great image. What it takes to create a great image is your creativity, your skill, your ability to see the moment, to compose with intention, and to take the shot. So you know you can have the most amazing camera in the world in the hands of someone who's not a photographer, and they're not going to be able to take a great image. But you, if you are honing these skills, if you're honing these abilities, you can take a shot with an iPhone that is on a magazine cover. So really, it's your eye. It's not about what you have in your technical, camera info.
Thank you so much. And I think that brings us to the top of the next hour. Lauren, thank you so much for your time on behalf of the U.S. Consulate in Durban. We appreciate you. And for the group here and our program partners on this, thank you so much for having us and letting us participate with you. We'll be watching out for any more questions that come in. And again, Lauren, you want to throw up your contact information one more time? Get everybody a chance to jot down that email address or Lauren's website. And thank you all for your time today. Have a great rest of your evening and wonderful weekend.
Thank you so much, Monica. It was great to be with everyone.